Hello and welcome back to DriveDriverDriven. My name is Humble and today is actually a little bit of a reshoot. I have already done the brakes and I shot the video and explained everything, had everything laid out well, and when I went to edit that footage weeks later, there's no audio. So this is past future me, I guess. This is well after the brakes have been done. In fact, the body's just about to go out for paint to sort of set up where the timeline is here. But I still wanted to go through and show you what I'd done and explain what I did. Even though it doesn't really show some of the work, I'll cut some of that back footage in. For now, I can explain better the tools I used and how and where I routed everything. This is all bodywork stuff. Zeus fasteners, that's the key word. Watch for that episode to come up later. But really what I wanted to talk about is the tube, like bending tube, straightening tube, and making a tool that you can use to sort of size things up. First up, we have a tubing straightener, which is this guy. It's kind of a crazy thing to look at. Really, what it does is you would run the tubing through it this way, and then as you cinch it down, it'll pinch that tubing, and then you run the tubing back and forth multiple times to straighten it out. There's a little roller on it, so on a desk or on the ground, as you feed tubing back and forth, you want to do longer runs, you can do that. From what I found, this actually works pretty decently if you get brake tubing in big coils. This just helps straighten it out a little bit before you start doing the really crazy bends or tighter bends like this one. Next up is we have just a little hand bender. So you would put the tubing in here. As you can see, I've got a little mark. Bring this guy down and you're going to work it around the mandrel, and that makes sure that you get nice smooth bends like this. And if you notice on this guy, I've also got markings here, and the reason why is because this was my test piece, and I would line up these marks, pull it around, and then I know where my tubing started against this marker, pulled it around, and then I marked my 90 degree, my 45, and my 0 on the tubing so that I know where they were in relation to the bend. And then having a pre-bent piece of tubing like this allows you to put it up against a floor, measure how much you'll need for the bend, or from the middle of the bend or the end of the bend, so that you can butt up on the floor straight up to like a bulkhead or a firewall or something like that, and you can end up with a perfect bend the first time, and that's because you're cheating a little bit. You have a template. I did a 90 degree, I did a 45, and I did a 180 using this tool so that I can use this same kind of scrap piece for the various bends and not have to eyeball it really. And this gives me an idea of how much room I need for the bend, where it can go, or how I can place it. Some other tools you'll need is you have this, which is a brake flaring tool. So you'll capture the tube in these holes, and you notice on this side it's flared out because this is the end that you'll be flaring against. This is your driven mandrel. So you'll wind this guy in, and what it does is it just forces this wedge into the end of the pipe to flare it out against these open flares on the tool itself. And that's how you end up with a flared end, which I don't have handy, but it opens up in like a 45 degree angle or something like that. These ends are called bubble flares, where not only does it open up, but it comes back closed into that style of sealing. And you have to be careful when you're running these style of flares because it's easy to crush these and lose the sealing by over tightening fittings. And then the last tool here is just a simple hose cutter or pipe cutter. These work by winding this in, running it around the tube. If I just put it on here as an example, you would wind this in, and then you spin it around the tube with your finger, and then as you turn it around, you'll dial this, cutter down. This increases the pressure as you wind it in, and then that's what cuts the tube slowly but surely as you wind it around. So in typical flaring tool fashion, we'll use this end here because it's not actually done yet. You'll put it into the tool, and because I was doing a particular flare, there is a kind of a fat base on this guy, and you want to make sure that the tubing sticks up the same distance as the base on your mandrel. And you're going to tighten it down, cinched in there, and the height is set. You can put the mandrel in, and that sits in place in the tube. And what that does is that helps support the tube while you're using this die press to make the flare in that tubing. And then what we'll do is run this down. It's quite a bit harder on this tubing because this is a steel tubing or a stainless steel tubing versus the copper nickel that I was actually using on the car. But now that that's done, you see how it's pressed up in on the tool. It's flattened out here. If we run this guy back off, that didn't work at all. I didn't have it tight enough. Yeah, so that just slipped in the tool. Had that not slipped in the tool, it would have looked like this guy. So you'd have a bubble flare on the end of it. This tubing is just a little too hard, this steel tubing. So this is closer to what I was actually using, which is like a nickel copper. And you can see I've tried the same thing a couple of times to get a bubble flare in there and had limited success on this, but after you try it a couple of times, you get that experience under your belt, and then when you're doing it for real, you'll end up with much better results, as I did. So now that those are all there, that's all the tools that I used to set all the tubing and etc., all the ends. Now what I want to show you is in the car and how this applied to the runs that I ended up making. So from the episode before where I had done the brakes is we had our pedals installed, and then we had our master cylinders installed, which you can see down there. And as you can see, the brake lines are already run in the car. Ran them down the center line here into the back there in front of the tank, and then up front. So let me tell you about the runs that I did. So you can see the 90 degree here, and it helped in setting up these 180 degrees off of the master cylinder, or using the 45 here to size up how far I could go in, and then up against our bulkhead, and then again around the corner. That's why having a piece of pre-bent tubing like this becomes really important, especially with markers on it, so you know where to start each bend as you make it around the corners. This isn't final mounted. I still got to put some P-clips in here and a piece of hose or something to protect this from abrading on the corner, because this will wear through. Down on the different runs here, you can see this is our front circuit. So it comes up, winds around, down to be collected here on this rail. We come back on this side of the bar, captured here on this rail, and then just a little S-bend. And up here on RT, I tried to copy the factory's positioning, but on the opposite side, given that this is a left-hand drive car. So by default, the factory has this mounting pad where this T would typically be for a right-hand drive car, and I didn't want to run this hose all the way over and then in when I could just put a riv nut over on this side and mimic that position. Other bike engined cars put this T in the middle. However, that is too tight for these cars where you might be using either a K-series power or Miata power. Chances are is that this could be damaged or interfere with the front pulley, the crank pulley on the engine, which sits right here. So that's why it's offset to one side or the other for a non-bike engined car. And then from the T, we have our brake switch. Then off to the sides here, again, because we're using our pre-bend to set our templates, it comes up and then off to sort of where the suspension sits on either side, just coming up this rail or that rail over there. And I haven't terminated these ends yet. I thought I had front brake hoses, or rather the front brake hoses that I do have are actually Miata application, not for the MK. So I'll probably end up making my own soft line to run to the outside corners in the front. However, I do have rear lines. So that brings us to our rear circuit. So you can see here, our rear circuit is actually this one in the middle, and it comes down here and around into our tunnel. From our tunnel, it follows this top rail all the way back. And then coming in through the back, we just wind around the perimeter to our brake tee here. And then from our brake tee, we come out to each corner. So on the rear, you can see I did actually terminate this. So we have our hard line comes in, hits these brake line adapters to go to the soft line. And they have basically a capture nut to go from this soft line into this hard line, and you would use that open style flare, not the bubble flare, for these ends. And this is where I was talking about if you over tighten, you can cause leaks on these corners. So you really want to be careful about how much torque you apply to these. You want it to seal, but you don't want to over torque it or over tighten it and cause it to deform and then leak that way. Never mind the fuel tank. We'll get to that in a future episode, but spoilers, the fuel tank is in there. So that's about where we sit brake-wise for the moment. Again, in future episodes, you'll see what we've done with the body, etc. That's about to go out for paint. I didn't want to go any farther with brakes because I want to get the corners on the car and get the car under its own weight on its own wheels before going further. And the body needs to come back from paint to get to the front to do that bit because you have to pull the front suspension on and off to get the body on and off the car. So we can do the rear, we can get the rear done brake-wise, and we can even begin the suspension install on the rear from this point, but we're not going to get to that for a little bit. Again, spoilers coming from future me. We got a few things to undertake before we get to actually making the car sit on its own weight. So that's where we are on the brakes. So not exactly the way that I wanted this episode to go, but that's sometimes how it is. Next up, working on the car, we're actually going to dive into the chassis and switch between the roll bar and the roll cage, because the roll cage needs to be drilled to fit and match the chassis, and all of that work has to be done before we do the body pre-fit. So next episode, look forward to that. That being said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.